Hello everyone, welcome to our Return to South Africa wine tasting. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits, and I'm joined by Eric Mercier of Juice Imports once again. Hello Eric, wonderful to have you as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me, appreciate it.
So we did not get a chance to talk off camera because this has kind of been a last minute hustle, but we got it all put together in the end. So 3 out of the 4 products we're pouring tonight. The very first wine we are pouring is not one of yours, it's the Beachhouse Chenin. But I think that this wine gives us a little bit of opportunity to talk about South African history, why there aren't, up till this point, haven't been very many like independent winemakers. Like pre-2010, I can think of like Meerlust, and how we got here with South Africa to this point. So let's talk a little bit about the cooperatives and kind of where South Africa was before kind of 2010 and where they are now. I'm not sure you heard me.
Did you not hear any of that?
No, I did hear it. I didn't realize that you wanted me to speak about it.
It was kind of a nice intro to give you a chance to talk about stuff. So you weren't just sitting there like twiddling your thumbs.
I could definitely talk about it. Yeah, no, that's great. So South Africa, historically, I love that you put me on the spot like this, by the way. That's
well,
great.
Historically, it's kind of like an interview format. I do the introduction, then I kind of throw it to you. We banter back and forth. We've done this before.
We've done this before, and it's been about this coordinated every time. So, South Africa, historically, has been dominated by large producers, and this is the case the world over. If you look back at sort of the 50s, 60s, 70s in particular in South Africa, obviously going through a lot of political challenges, social challenges with things like apartheid, and not only that, but coming out of sort of the devastation of World War II and being cut off from the world, essentially. What this meant was that a lot of the grape varieties that were actually available in South Africa were more geared towards the production of brandy than they were actually geared towards the production of quality wine. And so you had all these grape varieties that were designed to be very delicate, very low in alcohol, very high in acidity, which is what you need for distillation. So if you look at places...
And we've lost Eric for just a sec.
In Spain, for instance, that they modeled a lot of their... Well,
yeah, we got you back. No, we lost you for a sec, but we got you back.
Perfect. Yep. Anyway, so yeah, you need quite neutral white grape varieties in order to be making these styles of brandy, like cognac, armagnac, and then like brandy de Jerez, for instance, coming from Spain. And so a lot of the grape varieties planted in South Africa weren't necessarily geared towards really high quality wine production. They were more geared towards mass production of brandy. And then once brandy sort of fell out of favor, especially in, sort of the rest of the world, a lot of the brandy was being exported, obviously. Once we had this move towards drinking wines, and in particular high quality dry wines, they basically just took the grapes they already had planted and were like, we don't have to make brandy out of these, we can just make it into wine. And most of those grape varieties were not super spectacular for making wine out of, like Hollenberg, for instance. But Chenin Blanc, the grape that you're about to talk to you about, as I do a perfect segue the same way that you did at the start of this.
Yours was much better than mine.
No. But it's a grape variety that's both fantastic for making distillates from, but also for making really, really high quality white wine, despite the fact that Chenin Blanc, in theory, should not be delicious from such a warm Mediterranean climate. But for some weird reason, it works.
Yeah, and I mean, they had absolutely tons of it historically. I read a few different sources for this. Everybody agrees that more than half the vines in South Africa at one point were Chenin Blanc. I heard numbers as high as 65% of all of the vines planted being Chenin, which seems silly, but let's just go with way over half. And it's, it's an old Loire grape. It's pretty and it's got lovely acidity. It can give you really pretty kind of bright fresh apple and lemon and even some pineapple characteristics. It can give you lamb's wool, not at $12.95, but it can. And something you said before, you were saying your mother was trying to get out of Italian Pinot Grigio, and you said, well, you just want to shift gears into South African and Chenin Blanc. You're going to pay less money, and by and large, you're going to get a better product. Now, I did choose this one very specifically because this really is part of that cooperative style. This is wine by Douglas Green, who started making wine in the 1940s. He's one of kind of the big deals in terms of like exporting South African wines. He was separate from the KWV, but he was very much one of the cooperative folks. Long dead now. It says wine by Douglas Green. No, it isn't. Doug is dead. But the actual Chenin Blanc here, it's very much done in that old school cooperative style winemaking. And yet, as much as we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the South Africa kind of shitting on that program because they didn't allow like, small independent winemakers, this style of winemaking does still make, at least at the value side, really good wine. Now, for my dollar, I usually buy, if I'm walking into a wine store and I'm buying a $12 bottle of white, I'm probably walking out with Vinho Verde overall. But I do think that South African Chenin, even over the last 10, 15 years, but especially today, really does offer kind of that perfect mix of like cheap, but if you get a good one, you can really overperform the price point. And there's not that many of them left.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. I think that, especially if you're going from Pinot Grigio to South African Chenin, if you keep the price the same, like that South African Chenin is outperforming that Italian Pinot Grigio almost every time, in my opinion. For that sort of like $18 mark, it's hard to get much better than South African Chenin. But to sort of explain what we're talking about here with the idea of a cooperative. So normally what we think of when we think of a winery is that the person who makes the wine owns the vineyards, and it's all this sort of like neat parcel. What happens with a cooperative is there's basically, in some cases, thousands of grape growers who all own little micro plots of land, potentially all over the country. And then there's one producer who takes all those people's grapes, blends it into, a handful of different wines, and, says like, okay, cool, you have these grapes, they'd be good in this blend. You have these grapes, they'd be good in this blend. They blend it all together. And it's basically a way of these small farmers of continuing to make a living if they don't necessarily have, the training necessary to make wine or the facilities. If you look at an actual winery, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in most cases, in order to actually have a winery, versus land in South Africa is relatively inexpensive compared to a lot of the rest of the world. And so this was the way that wines were made for a long period of time. Now you see a shift away from that because they basically got themselves into the commodities market, into the market of selling wine for very inexpensive. And for a lot of these farmers, their aspirations are not just to make, sort of this minimum amount. They realize, hey, like, I'm a really good farmer. I'm making grapes that are way above the $12 a bottle price point, which is the reason why you get really good value in those $12 bottles from South Africa. But a lot of these producers have aspirations to do more than that. So now they're either working with independent producers, like the following three wines that we have, or some of them are actually going out on their own and getting investment and starting their own wineries, which is really exciting if your goal in drinking is specificity and authenticity and somewhereness. But if your goal is just like deliciousness, the cooperative structures is really, really useful for bang for buck.
Yeah, and that's something that's kind of persisted to this day with the cooperatives, not just selling to a big co-op, because KWU kind of died in 1990, 92. They're now like an independent company. They're not just like this big overarching governmental authority like they used to be. But I looked the number up actually in the Oxford Wine Companion. There's only 600 winemaking licenses in South Africa, but there's 3,440 grape growing licenses. So there's a lot more growers than there are winemakers. So yeah, it's definitely that everybody sells to not a central authority, but to wineries or negociants of varying quality. Some people sell to Distel and they make nightmare fuel to oceans out of it, and some people sell to someone better. Sorry, can we just talk about how bad Two Oceans is just for a sec? Like how sweet that Sauvignon Blanc is. I have Rieslings that call themselves like Cabernet that are not as sweet as Two Oceans Sauvignon Blanc. It's just terrifying.
Yeah, I had it in a blind tasting when I was studying for the WSET diploma, and it was vile. It was extraordinarily vile, and like for the price, it was not very good. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I'd rather drink, barefoot like Moscato, frankly, for like the same price. At least it's like fruity and bubblegummy. versus, you know, for like whatever it is, like the $9 a bottle for the Two Oceans Sauvignon Blanc. I was like, this is kind of like drinking like Gibson's pickled onions.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's very, very hard.
I kind of like that take, that the Moscato is just so lovable that not even barefoot can ruin it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's like, that wine is unarguably delicious. It's like Sutter Home's White Zinfandel. Like any like pretentious sommelier who is like, that doesn't taste good they're just wrong. It just tastes good in the same way that like cream soda tastes good. Like cream soda is like not going to change your life. You're not going to have like cream soda and change careers. Versus like you could have a really good glass of wine and be like, oh, I need to do this for the rest of my life. Like this is worth dedicating every ounce of my being to. But that's not to say that cream soda is not extraordinarily delicious and brings me like infinite joy. And like, again, same things with Sutter Home's White Zinfandel. Like I'm fully willing to admit that it's a different thing from what we do in the wine world. But that, again, it's not to say that it's not delicious and that it's not super fun. Versus like, you know, the hard, aggressive, sweet, oniony Sauvignon Blanc from Two Oceans. It doesn't give me the same. It doesn't give me anything. It gives me absolutely nothing.
I don't know how like the classic bell pepper note of Sauvignon Blanc just hard shifted into like white onion, but it really does, and it's almost like onion skin. It's really off-putting to me.
Yeah, for sure. Like sauerkraut, like hot dog condiment kind of vibe.
I thought you were gonna say hot dog water. I was gonna be okay. That's even too mean, but yeah, that's a step far.
Pinotage.
Yeah,
that's their Pinotage. That's the hot dog water. And if you blend the two together, you get like the full package.
Oh wow!
For sure.
Let's never do that.
Let's never do it.
All right, so let's move out of cooperative wines, as much fun as that was, and let's move into, you know, things where the people who grow the grapes at least most likely made the wine, including somewhere where I think there's a great deal of that going on with Craven. Now, I know they do have some grape buying initiatives, and they actually put the name of the vineyard very often on the front of the label. But talk to us a little bit about Craven. This is, I know, one of your favorite houses you work with, so tell us a little bit about Craven.
Yeah, so this is made by Mick and Janine Craven. They have been running this wine project for about 10 years now, which is really exciting. They, a couple of years ago, decided to transition over to working exclusively with organic growers. Before then, they were like 90% organic, but then they had two vineyards, that were farming conventionally still, and they decided like we need to make a decision at some point or another where sort of our allegiances lie, and like we just think that investing in these organic producers is the way that we want to go. And so now they're 100% organic across the board, including this Pinot Gris vineyard. There's not a lot of Pinot Gris in South Africa. It's really interesting. Pinot Gris is one of the most popular grape varieties in the world, often called Pinot Grigio if you're having like sort of an Italian style version. But there's very little of it planted in South Africa. Only, I think last time I checked, like 250 acres or something like that, which is may sound like a big number, but when you think of like Cabernet Sauvignon is like 100,000 plus acres, it's not really that much.
No.
Yeah. So what they do with this particular grape is instead of using the juice, they're actually using the juice and the skins. If you've ever been to a vineyard that's growing Pinot Gris, you'll notice that the skins are the most gorgeous color of all time. There's this sort of like coppery, pinky, kind of dusty rose color. And what you normally do with making white wine from Pinot Gris is you just use the juice. You just throw out the skins and use the juice. But in this case, their intention was to make what we call an orange wine, which is we use the skins to extract all the color and all the flavor. 60% of a grape variety's flavor is actually in the skins. So in this case, they've extracted 60% more flavor. Whether you like that flavor or not is still up for debate, obviously. But I know that this wine is consistently one of the top-selling wines in our portfolio, and it's one of the most beloved across the board, really, whether that be in Edmonton or in Calgary, or we sell it in Saskatchewan as well, and people go absolutely wild for it. It's like white wine, but then has the savoriness and the body of red wine. So it's really, no compromises being made here. But yeah, really, really small winery. They're only making about 2,000 cases a year total. when you combine all the wines they make all together. Versus, again, I can't imagine how much they're making at that Beachhouse, but I'd assume, 500,000 cases to 1 million cases probably.
I would assume less on the Chenin, just because it's not even listed on their website.
Okay.
They list, the terrible, awful Beachhouse Red, which I do not recommend to anyone. The Beachhouse Sauvignon Blanc, which we do have on the shelf occasion when we have room for it, because it is a huge step up and above Two Oceans, but then what isn't? And they have the rosé listed everywhere. Actually, lately, after the Sauv Blanc, the more stuff I dug into Beachhouse, I was trying to find out who the hell actually owned the bloody winery, which, good flippin' luck to you. I spent about 45 minutes digging into it, and it's owned by Douglas Green Wines, and there was one agent's website on page 5 of Google results, down in the Here There Be Dragons realm. That's where I actually found some corporate ownership for it. But yeah, it's not owned by one of the big guys like Distel or anything, or by Diageo. So I was kind of surprised by that. I did want to back up. Devon commented that he thought I was being a bit harsh on the Beachhouse. The reason I'm featuring this is, one, I did want to talk about South Africa and the cooperative system and KWV and how there's way more growers than there are winemakers, and this was a good way to do that. But B, I want to talk about this because this freaking owns. It's better than the Sauv Blanc, it's better than the Rosé, it's a whole other category than the Red. Like I said a little earlier, normally at $12, I would buy Vino Verde, but if you come up to our picks under $18 at the front of the store, this has been on there for 4 months because we really like it. Sometimes the big co-op places do a really great job. This is one of those. A couple of questions. John says ice with the Beachhouse. Absolutely. This is the sort of wine you do not feel bad about putting ice cubes in because you only paid $12 for it. And yeah, ice cubes in wine is fine if it's not something special. I wouldn't put ice cubes in this, or at least I wouldn't tell Eric if I did. No, I mean, I would certainly put ice cubes in the Beachhouse. Jeremy is a little bit
too.
A little cream soda. Little cream
little
soda.
Just regular soda.
Just regular soda.
Sparkling water. Just like a wine spritz.
Oh yeah, white wine spritzers are great.
Yeah.
I got a couple of more interesting questions. I'll let you field the both. Jeremy asked about apartheid, the impact on South African wines historically, and were wines embargoed?
Yeah. So really interesting thing is that during this time, because of the basically isolation, the world was rightfully very displeased with the measures that South Africa had put into place to basically oppress the Black and also the huge Indian population. Most people don't realize that behind white and Black South Africans, the Indian population is absolutely massive. And so the rules that they had in place were basically so heinous that the rest of the world was like, hey, we're going to intentionally no longer purchase things from you. We're not helping you in any way until you change these rules, because they're absolutely archaic, they're inhumane, there's some really great documentaries on it. Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, they actually did a movie version of it that's really, really great. So if you don't feel like reading through the 700 or so pages of his autobiography, which again is very much worth doing. I did it while I was in South Africa visiting these wineries, which was kind of a mind mess up. But either way, it's worth watching and learning more about this. So ultimately what happened for the wine industry was the consolidation of the wine industry, which is why we have so many large producers like this. There's basically a state-owned winery that bought all the grapes off of everybody. They dictated the prices. They dictated the prices the wines were being sold for. And so you didn't end up with a lot of diversity. And basically nobody was buying these wines. And then after apartheid ended, you had, again, this spread of different independent wineries starting to pop up. Now that exports were again available. I think the first one that was imported to Alberta after apartheid was Goats du Rhum, which is definitely worth drinking just for the story alone. But
sorry, I am much too fancy for Goats du Rhum. I'm a goat roti drinker.
You're a goat roti.
Sorry, that's such a nerdy joke.
Great wine.
Yeah, Goats du Rhum was the $12 South African red. The Goats du Rhum was a princely $16.95. Yeah, goat roti was like the premium goats de Rome. Man, that's a time capsule, isn't it? I haven't seen a bottle of goats de Rome in like forever. I assume it's still around.
Oh, they did some rebranding lately. Oh yeah, they did some rebranding lately and relaunched, and yeah, they're doing really well, from what I understand.
Good for them.
But yeah, one of the big legacies was that South Africa, since the start of apartheid, was not able to get grapevines. So they had to rely on their own grapevines that they had. And what happened was they accidentally propagated like literally millions of grapevines that had disease. So a lot of what's planted in South Africa from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, basically since World War II, is diseased grapevines. And so now they actually have one of the strictest grape quarantine measures on the planet. I actually got to go visit them. A friend of mine happened to know the lead scientist who does all the quarantining for these grape varieties. So I got to see a sneak peek of all the grape varieties that they were introducing to South Africa. They go through a 3-year quarantine. They get crazy sterilized, and then they propagate them from within this really wild lab. I have some cool pictures from the visit actually, but they're trying to plant a bunch of different grape varieties now that will do better in the climate. So they have Nero d'Avola, they have Xarello and Periata, which are the grape varieties of Cava. You have Nerello Mascalese. You have all these grape varieties that are coming from southern Italy, places that are really similar in climate, and they're going to replace a lot of the diseased vineyards that they have in South Africa. So yeah, there's been a lot of struggle. Even now, you'll see that most of the vineyards and most of the wineries are owned by white South Africans, and there's a huge push towards creating more equality here. And we're trying to support this as much as we can as well. We're currently in talks with Magna Carta, which is one of the few wineries in South Africa owned by Black South Africans. So that's really exciting. While I was down in South Africa as well, the WOSA, so Wines of South Africa, definitely give them a follow on Instagram. They're great people. They had a whole section dedicated to sort of trying to create more equality in the industry by focusing on the Black South Africans making wine in South Africa. So again, obviously still a ton of work to be done, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the current political crises happening in South Africa as we go along here. But yeah, there's been, again, they've definitely not recovered fully from apartheid. So it's definitely an ongoing struggle, and it's definitely left its lasting legacy on the wine industry for sure.
That was brilliant, Eric. Thank you. The second question, Devon actually absolutely nailed in the comments via text. So if you're watching on YouTube and you don't have access to the Facebook comments, I'll briefly summarize. But what makes this an orange wine is the fact that most, not all, but most grapes, when you cut them open, they don't have red juice. They have clear juice or green juice. When you actually age a wine on its skins, if it has red skins or black skins, they actually contribute the color to make a red wine a red wine. When you're making an orange wine, what you're doing is you're basically taking that red wine process, aging the probably clear, almost certainly clear juice on those skins to impart kind of a light orangey cast. The reason this is so vibrantly kind of pink copper is the fact that Pinot Grigio has kind of coppery pink skins, and that is lending the color to this. So the Italians would call it Ramato. You can call it an orange wine. There's a lot of different terms for it, but yeah, it's an orange wine because it is a white wine made go red. Although the more I learn about Pinot Grigio's history, the less I like Pinot Grigio as a white wine. Like the whole Santa Margherita just dictating that Pinot Grigio shall now be white from 1971 on. It's like the dumbest thing.
Yeah, when historically, it's always been thought of as a red wine or red grape. And, you see the same thing with Gewürztraminer is the same color as Pinot Grigio, for instance. Sauvignon is also often, there's different Sauvignons that are tinted. There's Muscatellers, so there's Roter Traminer and Roter Muscateller. So there's all these different grape varieties that are red skinned that are actually made into white wines. And if you look at something like Champagne is the prime example, somewhere around more than half the grapes grown in Champagne are red grapes, but most of the wines are white. And this is because the juice of most red grapes is actually clear. And by really gentle pressing and not allowing the grape skins to macerate with the juice, they're making these clear wines. So there's entire regions dedicated to making white wine from red grapes, essentially. Pinot Gris is such a great example of that, where there are very few like really spectacular white Pinot Gris. There's a handful from Alsace that are like absolutely mind-bending. But I've had way more skin fermented or orange wine or amber wine versions of Pinot Gris that are really compelling than white versions, I would say.
Kevin asked about if he's maybe over-chilled this, maybe he's not getting that much out of it. I'm getting like fresh sage or maybe fresh marjoram, and then I'm getting like strawberry, cranberry, something in the citrus family, blood orange.
Definitely blood orange for sure.
Yeah, and then almost something very tea-like as it kind of finishes up is very pretty. Marjoram is really the big...
Yeah, very oolong.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't drink a lot of oolong, but I've had it a few times. And yeah, it's not one of my like go-to tasting notes, but you're absolutely spot on with that.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely a herbal element this year. Again, I don't know what's contributing that. He does destem this, so there aren't any stems in this fermentation. Stems can often impart sort of a spicy herbal characteristic, but in this case, this is just whole berry fermentation. So they destem the grapes and then just ferment the berries themselves. They're quite gentle with the cap management, meaning that when those grapes float to the top of the tank, they're very gentle about pressing them down, doing pump overs, things like that. They're not being really aggressive. They're not trying to extract a lot from the skins. They're being quite gentle. I'm curious. It really changes from year to year. This is the lovely thing about what we call natural wines. So wines made without any additives, is that they really do like to highlight the difference from vintage to vintage. The vintage before this was like ultra fruity. It was like really clementine orange, persimmon kind of characteristics. And then this one is like more like tea, savory, a little bit spicy, a little bit herbal, a little bit peppery. And then we have the new vintage that's on its way right now, which is taking a million years to get here because of all the delays right now. But again, who knows what it's going to be like. I'm really excited to get into it, but I can only assume it's going to be as delicious as the last couple of vintages, but maybe just as different.
Awesome. Let's transition out of white and orange wines. Let's move into reds here. We're getting into the wine that Devon Smith will never in his life ever shut up about how much he loves and how much we don't sell enough and how much should be our best-selling red in the store, the Kadungu. He loves this so much, and I completely understand why. But he's just like such a super fan for this wine, and I always enjoy giving him a shit when I know he's watching. I also really like this. Why don't you walk us through the Kadungus? This is by Intellego. This is kind of their entry-level red. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this is made by Jürgen Goes, really amazing winemaker in the Swartland. So the first wine, the Craven that we just had is from Stellenbosch. So Stellenbosch is located basically just east of Cape Town. Where these grapes are grown is in what's called the Polka Dry Hills, which are quite cool, quite coastal, a lot of influence from the ocean. Versus the Kadungu that we're about to drink. This is coming from the inland.
We lost you there for a second, Eric. Sorry
We're
about
talking
that.
about a lot warmer, more. Yeah, and it froze in the best way. It's my.
Yeah, we got a beautiful pucker going there. Yeah, you looked real good. Real good.
So good. Yeah. Really catching my best side here. Swartland, again, north of Cape Town, more Mediterranean climate, way drier, less influence from the ocean. And so you end up being able to grow different grape varieties. In Swartland, again, on this coastal area, you can grow Chenin Blanc that's really delicate, very pretty, Cinsault that's very delicate and very pretty, versus in Swartland, you end up with these sort of often richer grape varieties, often Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre, things like that, the Rhone grape varieties. In this case, we have a blend of, I love this camera work right now.
Yeah, Mike snuck in and then we immediately put him on camera for sneaking, which was brilliant. So we are open, by the way. So somebody wanted a bottle of scotch from somewhere way up behind me. And Mike like crept in behind the camera, being so careful and so quiet. And then we just shoved him on camera anyway.
No one's safe.
No one is safe.
So good. Anyway, so yeah, Swartland. This is kind of like the underrated region of South Africa. So you have, this is basically like where the revival of young producers came in South Africa. So there's what was called the Swartland Revolution, which is where basically a bunch of young winemakers came to the Swartland, got to know sort of like the old school grape growers there who were selling their grapes for super cheap to distill, so the guys who make Two Oceans. And they were like, hey, how about we pay you 3 times the amount that you're currently getting paid? We'll help you convert to organics, and your wines will then be like really prestigious. And they're like, yeah, that sounds like a super good deal. And so a lot of producers have gone to Swartland and really invested in the region, invested in the farmers, and you end up with these like incredible wines. So Jurgen, like old school surfer guy, that's why this is called Kadungu. It's like, I think, like a version of Hang Loose from, I'm trying to remember where it's from exactly. Anyways, he's gone around the world and done some surfing here and there. And yeah, again, like a lot of his terminology is surf related. So Kadungu, kind of Hang Loose. And this is his entry-level red blend, which is both based mostly on Syrah. There's also Vedra in there as well. Shockingly low alcohol. This is like 11.5% alcohol, I want to say, in this vintage.
You're absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people associate like light in body with light in flavor, and that is not the case.
No.
This is like low alcohol, like in theory light in body, but like so hyper flavorful and like satiating. I think a lot of people drink like a light red wine and it feels thin and hollow and like tinny, versus this is like bombastic, full, you know, very satisfying, yet doesn't have like the high octane alcohol or sweetness or oak that you'd expect from some of those more sort of decadent versions of wine, which I really appreciate. He worked in the Northern Rhone at Jamais in goat roti. One of the most famous producers in the Rhone Valley. And so the fact that he worked there and learned how to make Syrah from them, that's why this wine is, you know, a 10 out of 10 for, you know, ridiculously low prices, in my opinion.
Michelle asked Syrah, and Eric was saying Mourvèdre. Your audio skipped. So it was Mourvèdre. The other thing that like surprises me with this is how much Clint we sell. Like, we can't keep Clint on the shelf. And okay, yes, it's a Pinotage, but this is so similar in style and just it's about as delicious. It's low alcohol. It's from the same damn country. I don't know why this isn't as big a hit as Clint is, because it should be. Maybe it's the sunglasses. I don't know. They look like the terrible ones people put in like their cars in the windscreen in the 90s.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, this should be as big a hit as like Clint is. And for whatever reason, for us, it's not. Maybe it's your best-selling red in your portfolio, but for us, it's kind of a struggle down here with this.
Yeah, I think it's two things. Like, one is the tannins. So this wine, despite being 11.5% alcohol, actually has some tannin, which is that mouth drying effect that you get from grape skins, in particular red wines, and it makes the wine very gastronomic. Well with foods, it's a little more age-worthy, and so.
Sorry, you skipped it. It was just it took about 5 seconds for you to say gastronomic, which was great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how I was actually saying it. Who knows?
Who knows?
But yeah, so I think the tannins are definitely a part of it. Tannins are sort of like associated with higher quality wines and wines that are, versus like the Clint is just juice. Like it's just like, it's crushable. You know, you can just slam back a bottle of that in 0 seconds and be quite content. And then the other thing is I think this has a lot more complexity. So there's a lot more flavors going on here versus the Clint. I feel like this has that really nice combination of spice, almost like cinnamon kind of clove vibe going on underneath, a little bit of an anise vibe, a little bit of black licorice, a little bit of cherry, a little bit of balsam. Like, you're kind of all over the map here. Like, I could probably list another 30 different flavors that are in this wine. And I think that sometimes scares people away a little bit, versus the Clint is just like, again, it's universally appealing. Anybody who had that wine would be super satisfied, versus this, again, because it has more complexity, because it has more of maybe a savory element to it. I think it could be a little bit more challenging for certain palates, but that's not to say that it's not, spectacular. And it is one of our top selling wines from South Africa. This was a wine that I used to get brokered in for me when I worked at Vinarks.
Oh, wow. You've got
way
some
back
history
then when I
with
worked
this,
in retail. Yeah, I literally convinced an importer to bring this in for the wine shop that I worked for, and I bought 100% of Alberta's allocation every year at Vinarks. And then the second year that it came in, I sold a little bit of it to a couple like really good restaurants here. And then the third year, I was no longer working for Vinarks. I had started my own importing agency, and the old importing agency reached out to me, and she was getting out of the business, and said, "Hey, you introduced me to this amazing winery. Would you like to put them in your portfolio? I can introduce you to Jurgen." And it just so happens that I was going out to South Africa a couple months later, and I was like, yeah, I would love to go meet Jurgen. I just happened to be there. And so since then, we've been working with them. And it's been one of our number one sellers ever since then. So yeah, definitely a super long history with this. Like, this is probably, he's only been making wine for 10 years, and I've probably been drinking it for 6 or 7 of those years, which is really cool. You can't really say that about too many wines.
Well, I made the terrible mistake of saying the C word, and now I have like 5 comments like wanting Clint. But it's coming back right away in very limited quantities. Clint, I think, has become like way more popular than you can really handle. You've got way more requests for it than you can really fill. But I think we're getting a little bit of Clint.
Yep. And we're currently talking to them because, so to give you an idea about like what happened last year with COVID, was that most countries shut down and their wine sales decreased. At least the ones that South Africa exports to, one of those major ones being Japan. And so Clint is actually a cuvee that's made for Japan. It's not made for the rest of the world. It's made, they make 100 cases of it. It all goes to Japan. They drink it all in Japan. And so when I went to South Africa and drank Clint, because he had some at the winery, because he's like, I keep a couple cases for myself. I was like, this is really good. Can I buy some? And he's like, okay, if we have some extra cases, because they only want 100 cases. So I think, that year he made like 120 cases, and it's just a matter of how many grapes were harvested that year. And I was like, okay, cool, we'll take those 20 cases. And then he reached out to me right after it landed and sold out instantaneously, and was like, hey, Japan is like shut down right now because of COVID. They're not taking their allocation. Is there any chance that you'd want more Clint? And I was like, how much can I get? And he's like, how much do you want? And I was like, well, we'll take 50 cases. So we ended up getting like more than 50% of his entire annual production of Clint. So I just reached out to him after we got our 20 case allocation again this year, after getting 70 cases last year. And we're like, hey, like, I know you said that we can only get these 20 cases, but if anything happens, and they're like, oh, we might still have some of that 2019 because we didn't sell it to anybody else. We only sold it to you. So we might, haven't responded yet, but we might be able to get more of the 2019 Clint, which will show up after the 2020 Clint has already been here. So it'll be a whole mess, but hopefully it all works. But yeah, either way, Clint is amazing, and we want to drink as much of that wine as everybody else does. So
yeah. So yes, we are going to get some Clint. It sounds like not very much, and it's probably going to be sold in a couple of days, but we are going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be like a bottle per person limit, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to have to do, because it's just absolute ridiculousness with Clint. But that's fun sometimes. Not when it's a wine I want, but as a retailer, it's kind of fun.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, we're going to quickly talk about what we have for upcoming attractions here. We need a shameless promotion corner, so just bear with us for a minute here, Eric. For Wednesday next week, we are dipping into fun sours, because it appears, at least for now, that we are past our final bloody spring snowstorm. So we're going to do a bit of sour beer, because sours are always fun just at this time of year when it's just starting to get warm outside, and I'm getting a little tired of IPA. That's a lie. I never get tired of IPA. But we're going to do some like fun sours. So we have like a mint gin goza from Zero Issue. We have a green tea and apricot sour from Town Square out of Edmonton. Those are just kind of our like fun, different flavors, something a little bit, you know, offbeat, things that we haven't really done before. We're doing Jam Up the Mash again, and here's why. Jam Up the Mash kind of, well, it was during the All the Things tasting, and we all know how that went completely, horribly, ghoulishly off the rails. There was some stolen thunder. That's a lovely way of putting it, Aaron. I think a lot of people forgot just how much we like to jam up the mash based on what happened after. So we want to revisit this just because it does rule, and I do want to talk about it in like a little more serious context. And then finally, Rebellion Brewing out of Regina. I keep hearing about how awesome this brewery is. They finally put a little tiny beer into Alberta. So I ordered some of their pineapple sour. I haven't had it yet. Apparently it rules. I haven't tasted it yet. So this will be a little bit of a fun one. Just some nice, fun, fresh, low alcohol, easy drinking stuff for the early part of spring. Now for spirits tasting next week, we've been teasing this for a while, talking about it for a while. We are finally going to dip in and actually do the rum event. So rum, happily, is a lot cheaper than Scotch. So tickets are $25 for this one. And yeah, we're going to do 4 different rums here. 3 from Guyana. One's going to be like our, here's the rum you expect rum. This is Pussers. They're about as traditional as you could get. 40% alcohol. You know, it's Pussers. They've been making it for 300 and some years. Like, it's a really traditional old school brand. This is their 15-year, which for at least our market, this is their flagship. It's big, it's sweet, it's rich, it's pretty, but this is the rum you expect. I want everything else to come as a surprise. Enmore and Portmarant. These are 2 of the last distilleries in the world still using wooden stills. And these come off in a way, like they're little tiny wooden alembics. They come off in a way that no other rum in the world really does. They're incredibly pretty. They are succulent's the only word that comes off because they have this sweetness that's present, but it's almost a wine-like sweetness rather than just that omnipresent kind of compressed banana and tropical fruit molasses sweetness you get off most rum. These have a very different sweetness and richness to them, so these are really outstanding. I'm also trying to get Eldorado to actually join us for this one. We will see if we get a guest for that. And then finally, Clement. This is from the French Caribbean and is made subject to the agricole laws, just like cognac, just like French wine, just like French cheese. So they actually don't make it from molasses. They make it from fresh run sugarcane juice, and it comes off much, much more like a brandy, a lot drier. Yeah, it'll be a really fun little introduction to rum and some different outside the box amber rums that maybe you haven't experienced before.
Who wanted rum?
Who wanted rum?
Who wanted rum?
We've had like occasional requests. They haven't been like on the live stream so much, but we occasionally get like stuff pop up in the Untitled like Facebook inbox of like, hey, when are you guys doing rum? If you're doing rum, let me know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if I was smarter, I'd have saved those messages and I'd be messaging those people now, but I didn't save any of them. So, and yes, there is definitely the don't be a dick rules of if you can't obey purchase limits, I will force purchase limits upon you. But yes, the Clint is going to be really, really limited. I apologize for that. So, the Silwervis Smiley Red. Let's talk about this. Thank you for bearing with us, Eric. Sorry, that went a little longer than I thought it would.
No, I have nothing to do. I'm in it for the long haul here.
We have a lot of wine left in the bottles. It's just make terrible, terrible television.
Excellent. Smiley. This is from Silverbase. This producer is also in the Swartland, so we have sort of 2 back-to-back Swartland producers, but highlighting sort of the 2 styles that the Swartland can do. The Kadundu is less typical in the sense that it's low alcohol, bright, fresh. This is more stereotypical of the region, which is full-bodied, intense, flavorful, saturated. This is made from a handful of different grape varieties, including some interesting Portuguese grape varieties. The interesting thing about, again, South Africa that we talked about at the very beginning of this was that they have this history of distilling, but with that, they also have a history of making fortified sweet wines. So the same way that you'd see in Portugal, but also the same way that you would see in like Herrac, in sherry, in the areas where you're making sherry. And so they have a history of making these fortified wines. So some of the oldest grape varieties in the country are things like Tinto Barocca, Tinto Amarella, things like that. And so they're actually using some of those grape varieties in here alongside of things like Cinsault, which is, again, definitely worth talking about. Cinsault, for me, is maybe the most exciting red grape variety coming from South Africa.
I'd agree with that.
Unlike
100%,
Mourvedre
yes.
and Syrah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Unlike
Cinsault. Just absolutely adore it.
Syrah and Mourvedre that tend to be very full, very bombastic. Yeah, Cinsault tends to be like a little bit the opposite. Even though growing in a hot climate, you can make these delicate.
Well, that was some lovely word salad from Eric, unfortunately due to the audio skipping. Do we have you back, Eric? I think we got you back.
That's a good.
Not quite. We have like 70% of you back there. Sorry, it's been a little bit choppy tonight. I apologize. No. We've definitely got your sweet flow there. So yeah, no, I think we got you back 100%.
So yes, Cinsault in South Africa tends to be Pinot-like, but not like Burgundy Pinot. It tends to be more like California Pinot, that sort of riper, juicier style of Pinot. And so Cinsault for me is incredibly exciting. There's some really old vine Cinsault. It tends to do well in the climate there. So in dry conditions, in hot conditions. And so, yeah, Cinsault is very exciting to me. So the fact that it features in this blend is really great. This is also a non-vintage wine. So unlike most wines that come from a particular year and are designed to highlight the variation from vintage to vintage, the goal of this is just to show the Swartland as a whole. So this is a blend of, I believe, 4 different vintages, all blended together. The oldest vintage, obviously the smallest amount, and they basically just keep adding. Every single year they'll bottle some, but then they'll also make some. And so you end up with this sort of more well-rounded, more complex version of what the Swartland actually is. You get old wine, young wine, and everything in between. And it helps, again, smooth out some of the corners, but also add a ton of complexity, almost this like really nice like caramelized note to it that I find happens with these what we call Solera style wines, or Reserve Perpetuelle if you're in France, I guess.
I'll be honest, the thing that I'm getting like as like maybe not the dominant note, but the thing I pick it as like the most identifiable is like war tip sauce, like a kind of chili oil and soy sauce blend with a bit of garlic. It has this real like Chinese like war tipped pot sticker sauce sort of vibe to it that is really interesting, and it jumped out to me immediately. Like somebody asked in the comments, like, "What's the nose on this?" I said, "Okay, what's the nose on this?" I'm like, "Oh no, it's like soy and ginger and garlic, and it's really pretty." And I get those like pretty fruity hot peppers that I usually expect more like from Chile, but I get a little bit of like tropical peppers like an habanero on this. And then you get those oxidative notes, which I think is what I'm getting is the soy is the oxidative things. It's got a lot of really interesting stuff going on. And yet, as wild as it is on the nose, you get it in the mouth and it's very safe. It's very much what you'd predict like a big chunky South African red to be.
Completely derailed.
Yeah, definitely. Also like lots of, again, plum, those ripe fruit characteristics, like plum, like fig. For me, again, this is like a lot of like figgy jam kind of qualities going for it. But also some red fruits in there as well. Definitely some raspberry. But yeah, I really like the way that you're going with that sort of like soy, like star anise, ginseng, like definitely on that end of the spectrum for sure for me. Which I really like. I like some of those sort of umami notes that pair really well with food. Again, if you think of something like, you know, lamb, which is literally what's on the label here.
Oh
so
my
to
God,
describe
this
the
in
label
lamb
a
would
bit,
be like amazing.
right?
I mean, to be
so
honest,
yeah,
what I want
label-
with this is like a beef teriyaki plate, not like from a good Japanese place, but like from the like the late night Japanese place.
Yeah.
With this,
Yeah.
would be like absolute lights out.
Ito
But
in
yeah.
the mall.
Not Ito in the mall. More greasy spoon, more better.
yeah,
not
okay,
not
yeah.
like the Diet Coke of Japanese food, but just like Japanese food with like too much fat and a little too much sugar.
Yeah.
Spring roll was a Japanese place.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the label here, the label is what's called a Smiley, which is what the wine is named after. A Smiley is actually like considered a cut of meat in in South Africa, which is a lamb's head, and they would traditionally roast these over like a little fire, in like this almost like cylindrical little fire pit, and they would roast it. And at one point or another, it was considered like the offcuts, which is what they wanted to make this wine out of. So they wanted to use Cinsault, Tinto Barocca, grape varieties that are less prestigious, and show that they can actually be like the best, because just like a Smiley used to be considered an offcut, it's now considered like the delicacy of South Africa. So like it's weird how our perceptions of certain things change. And this is a really great example of grapes that would have been, from the Swartland, so nobody really cared about them, even 10, 15 years ago. And then also grape varieties. A lot of people go into a store and they're like, oh, just give me a Cabernet Sauvignon. They're not coming in and like, hey, do you have a non-vintage blend that includes Tinto Barocca? So essentially those grapevines, those grape varieties are just unsung heroes that are making really delicious wine, but don't have necessarily the recognizability that other grapes would have. So that's kind of their ode to all things offcut.
I absolutely love that. I will admit the label is a bit of a nightmare. I've never liked the label, but yeah, I gotta
I
say,
love the label.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It's
It's psychotic.
it's bizarre, and I love that it's just like so proud about it. It's got the like drama lines coming after. It's like, look what we did. We're really proud of it. But no, I absolutely love the red. It's so safe that, I feel like, I could open this with my dad and be like, yeah, it's a South African red at 13.5. This feels very safe. And it's like, I would always be coming back to this and finding something different, finding something challenging, rooting out new aromas that I don't always associate with just like New World red wine or with, anything not super oxidative, period. There's a lot of things in this that I would associate more with like a Fino sherry than I would with like a traditional bottle of like red table wine. And I absolutely love that about this.
We are also sold out of it now. So whatever's on the shelf is all that you guys, all that you can actually get. And not only that, but the husband and wife team that ran this winery are no longer a husband and wife team. So we're not entirely sure whether we're getting an allocation or how that works anymore. So it's all very confusing to us, but it ends up being a little bit of a rarity all of a sudden. So hopefully we can track down more of it at some point here. But in the meantime, we
have this. We have this tonight.
Exactly. Yeah, you have it tonight. You have it for now.
That rules.
Yeah, it's pretty darn tasty. I had this like a week ago and was just like, so good.
And it just keeps opening up. Like, and now I'm getting like red like licorice nibs, the movie theater licorice, which is so different from like Twizzlers. It's like the good red licorice.
Oh man, nibs are where it's at.
And yeah, like actually the other one I'm really getting is like black cardamom, that other type of cardamom, the big like chestnut sized ones that have like hairs on them for reasons. I get a lot of that out of this. I really dig this. And yes, Deanne, you're right. More wine rules, more don't be a dick, don't hog all the cool stuff when it sells out. I will admit, like, one thing that's kind of come out of COVID with all these shipping issues and everything else is like, I personally have always been very anti like purchase limits. We've always had like rule number 1, don't be a dick. Like, don't buy a flat of something, try to limit yourself. We're getting to the point these days where between some of the limited stuff we get from the Calgary brewers where they're giving it to us because they're our friends, that's not COVID related, we get very little, but we get some. And then just, maybe not divorce related, but things where, it's just very limited. Yeah, we're getting to the point where purchase limits are starting to become a thing down here, and I don't really like it. I don't like enforcing purchase limits. I don't like being that guy. I like having a very, quiet, to a certain point, I do like having kind of this quiet, forgotten about store down in Lethbridge that, nobody in Calgary drives down and shops at, and now we get people driving down all the time. Like, oh, this sold out in Calgary in 15 minutes. How do you have a whole shelf and you're not enforcing purchase limits? Can I just have all of it? No, you can have half. Are you enforcing a purchase limit? Now I am. Yeah, it's gotten a little weird these days. We're apparently a destination store, and it's a bit odd feeling, and I don't know exactly how to feel about it.
That's a good problem.
To maybe touch on that a little bit as far as like shipping during COVID. So one of the things that I really wanted to point out, and a reason you should really be supporting South African wine right now as a consumer, is that over COVID, basically their government decided that the best way to prevent people from hanging out with one another was to make the sale of alcohol illegal in all of South Africa, including exports. Their ideology behind this was that if you can't drink, you're probably not going to parties, and therefore not giving people COVID, getting people COVID, et cetera. And especially in such in a country where there's this really fragile tension. They're trying to do everything they can to again make people safe. Like it seems very reasonable, but the sale of alcohol being illegal maybe seems a little less reasonable.
I was going to say,
nothing
like introducing a complete prohibition into a delicate, sensitive situation where tempers are at a boiling point. Now everyone has to deal with it sober. Oh, God, I can't imagine what South African Reddit was like for that period. God, it'd just be awful.
So the industry last year lost over $500 million. And there's something like, I can't remember what it was, like 250 million liters of bulk wine currently just like sitting unsold, unbottled, just in tank because they weren't able to export or sell anything. And there's no point in buying glass for bottles if you can't sell wine, et cetera, et cetera. And so we saw, basically it had sort of the reverse effect of what they wanted to have. If you think about it, like a lot of the people who are harvesting grapes are migrant labor. It's the people who are in sort of the most challenging situations right now. And what happened was that a lot of the winemakers in not winemakers, but like the wineries in general were like, hey, like we have so much wine left over from last year. We can no longer buy as many grapes from you this year. And so they're like, cool, we don't need to harvest half of our vineyard. And so we'll just leave it to rot because it costs us less money just to not harvest those grapes. And so therefore it means that there's less work for these people who are, migrant labor. And so it basically just like trickles down and results in everybody along the way being like incredibly hurt by this decision. Again, there's a lot of politics involved with this, and I'm not going to get into all of it because I can't claim to possibly understand it. I don't even understand what's happening in Canada, let alone,
No, I don't.
It's hard enough to put.
I have enough to do here to like keep our store safe and clean and responsible. Like
exactly, yeah. So either way, a lot of our producers really struggled because they weren't allowed exporting their wine for a significant period of time. Luckily, most of them are in a position where there is such demand for their wine that they understood that the second that they were allowed to export, they would have a market for it. But with a lot of these bigger producers, they just look elsewhere. They're like, oh, I can't buy my $10 bottle of wine for you that I need to retail to hundreds of customers across all of Canada. Cool, I'll look to another country that can produce a $10 bottle of wine that tastes approximately this way. And so instead of buying wine from South Africa, they're buying wine from Chile, Argentina, Australia, wherever they could get, sort of bulk wine from. And so, yeah, it's been really challenging for some of these producers, a lot of people going out of business. Again, a lot of struggle like all the way down the line. And so it's really interesting to see how they're going to deal with it this year. Fortunately, we were in a position where we could buy more from our producers this year. And so we sort of just like doubled down and we're like, hey, how can we help you out? Obviously, again, with people not being able to export to, places like Japan, not taking their allocation and then not being able to export for a significant portion of the year. These people are our friends. Like these are all made by friends of mine, and I want to support them in any way that I can and support this industry, especially when these are the producers who are, well, I'm sure I'm frozen again now, but
no,
these are the producers.
You can last it a good 2 seconds, but you're fine. It actually worked out just fine.
But yeah, these are the producers who are investing in their communities and doing things like doing free internship programs for Black South Africans that want to start making wine, because that's what needs to happen is we need to get them into these sort of positions of power. And so to have these small wineries then vanish because of this one-time regulation thing would be really double down on these producers and continue trying to invest in them and do whatever we can to support. Obviously, it's very limited, and there's only so much we can do, but it's just an interesting discussion to have at the very least, and an excuse for me to drink a lot more South African wine over the last 6, 8 months, 12 months, however long we've been in the void.
Devon and I have been always saying, like, we're going to keep tasting South African wine online during tastings till it actually catches on. We're going to just keep running into that brick wall till we eventually run through it, because South Africa rules, and if you're not drinking it right now, you're missing out on one of the best values in wine. Not red wine or white wine or orange wine or just wine. It's just in wine. South Africa is where it's at to a certain point. And I feel like people are missing out, and that's why we're going to keep doing these events. And that's why I really love doing them. Do you have kind of your elevator pitch for South African wine that you really want to tell people? Like, what makes you love South African wine, like, more than anything else? Not to put you on the spot at all.
Yeah. I think they can make any style of wine in the world. They can make everything from really light, very delicate, very pretty white wines, all the way up to bombastic, full-bodied reds. Some of the most gorgeous sparkling wines I've ever tasted have been from South Africa, fortified wines. I've tried incredibly old wines in South Africa, wines from the 60s while I was in South Africa, which is, again, such a pleasure to see what they were doing back then without really even understanding, frankly, like reading some of these winemaker notes. They're like, we don't know why we did this, but we did it. We don't know what grape varieties we used, but we did it. And so I think
God, it was a Wild West back a few decades ago, wasn't it?
Definitely the Wild West from a winemaking perspective, for sure. But yeah, they can make any style of wine, and not only that, but they do it for, again, some of the best value on the market. And not only that, but if you're willing to spend a reasonable amount of money on wine, if you're willing to spend $20 or $30 on a bottle of wine, that money is going back to farmers. That money is going back to winemakers, in a really great way. It's not going towards paying for taxes and mansions and things like that. Like, that's going towards the people, which is really great. Versus if you're buying a $30 bottle of wine from Napa, that money is going towards for real estate.
Yacht. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, you're paying for that sort of thing. Versus in South Africa, if you're spending $30 on a bottle of wine, like it's that money's getting back to, at least in the case of the producers that we're working with. I obviously can't speak to everybody else, but I think that it's an exciting place, and it's a young wine industry. All these winemakers that we're working with are like either under 40 or right around 40. So that means that we have another like 40 years of tasting wines that they make and seeing their progression, which again is very exciting to me. A lot of my favorite winemakers are like 75 years old already. So I'll get to taste another 10, 15 vintages from them, and then it'll be on to somebody else. Versus these winemakers, we can watch them over the next 40 years, and they're changing the entire industry. And that's not the case in France. With the best producers, they're just continuing to make really high quality wine. Versus this is, they're exploring, they're figuring out new things. So I don't know, how long is this elevator ride? Obviously,
I don't know, but it sure sounds like you and I have got another 50 years of staring at each other. Hopefully not just to a camera, but co-hosting events like, so Eric, what's new from what I saw you 50 years ago? But yeah. No, it is kind of funny. Like, wine people never really retire. They get out of the game for a couple of years and then like come back and they're attached to this new crazy project, and like, who they are, and they really don't need to be working, so they took this giant buyout and they're like, oh yeah, no, I love wine, I want to keep doing this. It's kind of funny. Wine is one of those industries where no one ever really fully retires. They always have like a side hustle, even if they really don't need it. They'll go from being like one of the most prominent winemakers in Australia or Chile or California, and they'll just like, retire, sign their non-compete, and then just become like a shed east on the sly. It's a fascinating industry. I do really like that about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. This was really fun. Are we fast? Oh, I thought you said, geez, we're fast. Like, no, we're not. We're past an hour. We're fine. Oh, geez, we're fast. Jeremy's been on fire tonight, honestly. All right, Eric Lassie, stick around so we can chat afterwards, but I think I'll wrap things up here. This was our South African event. Yes, we do have Clint coming back. Rule number 1, don't be a dick, is in effect. We are going to be enforcing probably a light purchase limit of like 3 bottles a person. Depending on exactly how much we get, might be 1. I hope it's not. Otherwise, everything else that we have is available in the shop. This one's up in the counter up at the display of inexpensive wines. The rest of them are down in the South African section. Thank you very much, Eric from Juice Imports, for joining us. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits. This has been a really fun kind of Friday night tasting. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a wonderful night.